Welcome to the Journey of an Aesthete podcast, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human. This is the show, Journey of an Aesthete. It's a podcast, and I'm really excited to have George Kateb on this show for many reasons. First of all, I've read most of your work over, I'd say, a 20-year period, and it's really impressive. And it's really, I've learned an enormous amount from it. I should say that on my show we have poets and novelists and filmmakers and dancers, and we even have an athlete that came on last week. But I do believe that the practice of nonfiction in general, and of course philosophy and political philosophy, is as equal to those other fields, and is an art and can be an art when it's at its best. And I certainly think that you have contributed in that regard. And
thank you.
And I look forward to discussing your ideas and work to a general audience. And your background is quite interesting. You have a background in Amherst College, correct?
Yes, I taught at Amherst College for 30 years, from 1957 to 1987, when I left Amherst College for Princeton, where I taught until I retired in 2002 and have continued to live in the town of Princeton since that time.
Well, that's really interesting because that puts you in a certain time period that is really was really fertile in both philosophy and political philosophy, wouldn't you say? So that means you were working at a time when John Rawls emerged and Judith Sklar and some names we can get into. One of the first figures I talked about on my show was Isaiah Berlin. Very first show, and I realized that you're a critic of Berlin, but you also take a
yes, but an admiring critic. If I may interrupt you, I did greatly admire his energy, his abundance, his perception, but I could not accept everything that he stood behind. You wrote I learned a great deal from him. Yes.
So that's the correct phrase, is admiring critic. So it's out of great respect. But there's a funny passage in one of your essays on Berlin. It's in Patriotism and Other Mistakes, which is a book I highly recommend. A collection of political essays.
Thank you.
It's called "Can Cultures Be Judged?" And in this, there's a passage that cracks me up a little bit. It says, "There is no talking an aesthete out of his position."
I'm sorry. There is no what?
There is no talking an aesthete out of his position.
Yes. Okay.
It's funny. And then too, Berlin's deepest commitment, which is to the human stature, is not only deep but also honorable. But his defensive aesthetic strategy, if I have described it accurately, is quite dubious, and it is not likely to appeal to many people, even radical pluralists, who would prefer. But anyhow, I don't want to go on to. So I thought that was interesting that the title of my podcast, and you talk about that. But then actually the theme in that book, if I may speak about that book alone for a minute, is really complex because you're dealing with very difficult moral issues and issues of human desire, and how, if I understand correctly, how human cravings or human idealization, wanting to manipulate the world to fit a pattern, actually causes evil in the world. And you write actually great length in a couple of these essays on that subject, which is a very complex subject. And I think you connected to patriotism, which is also kind of idealization or kind of a. But anyhow, I'm getting too far ahead of myself. So your background is in the 50s and 60s then, in terms of your.
That's correct. I graduated from Columbia College in 1952, and then spent a few years at Harvard in the Society of Fellows as a junior fellow. I got my PhD from Columbia, I think it was in 1960, and I got the PhD a few years after I began teaching at Amherst College, where I stayed, as I said, for 30 years. Yes, so that my life was spent in New York and in Massachusetts, almost entirely, until then it transferred to New Jersey. I'm really a child of the Northeast, northeastern states of the U.S., and though I've traveled from coast to coast, so to speak, it is the part of the country that I feel most, I don't want to say at home in, that's too smug a phrase, but that I feel the things that I respect are respected in it, and that pleases me a great deal, to have been able to sustain a life in the Northeast. Though I sometimes have yearned for California, like almost everybody else. But
Me too. Me too. Absolutely. Actually,
any temptation. Yeah.
I actually like California, but I was born in New York City, Manhattan. So you're talking to someone that very much shares your. And then I lived in New England for 30 years in Boston. So you're talking with you're talking with a host that I'm very deeply connected to that part of the United States. We could talk about what role that plays in your political philosophy if you want, but I don't. But there's so much to cover. One of the many reasons why I wanted you on the show, other than that you're one of my heroes in nonfiction writing, is that there's a lot of misconceptions, I think, among the general public over words like what is democracy, what is individualism, what did Emerson really stand for, what's the importance of Emerson. There's a lot of, I think, misconceptions. People, I really read things that I don't like about Emerson, saying that he encourages selfishness and avarice, and all these kinds of misconceptions. When in fact, as you write in, I think it's in Human Dignity, you say that individualism and egotism are opposites. Right?
I try to establish a distinction between them. Yes.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of misconceptions. So I've got you on the program so you can clear up some of these misconceptions. So when did you first start developing your unique reading of Emerson and I think the American Constitution, correct? You feel that talk a little bit about how you came to your theory on that, or your
right. It's hard to describe the genesis of things about oneself without misrepresentation, to pretty up the picture, make the picture prettier or tidier than it actually was. Concerning my interest in Emerson, what I could say is this truth that I think from my undergraduate days at Columbia College and forever after until now, I have found Emerson a very compelling writer, and the teacher at Columbia that had something to do with that was Mark Van Doren. That name is familiar. Still,
very much so. Was he your mentor at that time, or teacher?
Yes, he taught at Columbia College until he retired in, I think, in the late 50s, at the age of 65, something like that. I got him not when he was an old man, but certainly late middle age at the very least, and he was the most compelling teacher I ever had at any level. I would not say that he alone impressed me with his capacity as a teacher. There were other people at Columbia, a place of great teachers, certainly in the 1940s and 50s, and I believe has always remained faithful to the mission of the university professor, as a teacher, as well as a writer. But Emerson meant a great deal to me from the start of any sustained attention to academic matters that I developed. Why Emerson has this hold on me still, I can only say that he has a way of formulating things that is often surprising and ingenious and independent-minded and incisive all at the same time. I know that he trades in exaggeration, but I think he really did believe that is one mode of rhetoric that is scorned but should not be, provided it is a kind of exaggeration that never really departs from the truth. It awaits the thing being exaggeratedly praised, for example, to become worthy of such praise, and would become worthy of such praise if it were given the right attention rather than a half-hearted attention or a cynical attitude or a distaste, an attitude full of distaste. I think this is Emerson's greatest lesson. A thing that you don't think deserves to be looked at really probably deserves to be looked at and thought about. So he writes essays on various things, many of them commonplace, the things themselves. But then he what does he say? He creates a kind of he makes everything into potentially worthy of being the subject of an essay, being worthy of sustained attention as a work of art is. And everything is incipiently straining to be better than itself, straining to achieve the permanence or the definition of a work of art. Every person is, though it doesn't seem to be the case, just that things in nature, of course, do not have will or intention, but what they too deserve is repeated and intense attention, and they, so to speak, flower under your gaze. This is what Emerson is about. And he strikes many people as sentimental, sugary, and not worthy of the attention of any adult. But I just think this attitude will not do.
Yeah, I mean,
fortunately for us, there have been important critics like Harold Bloom, who have written persuasively about the greatness of Emerson, and so I can't claim to be the first. I can't claim to be the only person to take Emerson with the utmost seriousness in the latter part of the 20th century into the 21st. But he is something, and I have admired him from my undergraduate days and have never stopped admiring him.
Yes, I mean, I'm glad that you talk about all these matters, especially the misperceptions or misconceptions. So you're, I mean, Cornel West has a blurb on your book, Human Dignity. He calls you the last, that is the first and only thoroughgoing Emersonian in American political thought. And
for Cornell, though, that is not unmixed approval.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
There's a little edge there, but I appreciated it greatly, and because I admire Cornel West so much. Yes. Right.
Yeah, I wanted to get into because Emerson, the essays that come to mind that are the most interesting to me, and it's hard to say because he wrote so much, are Compensation, Circles, Experience. I mean, this is what Compensation and Circles are really, really interesting.
Yeah. And they're related to each other. Yes, go ahead. And experience, you say. Any others stand out in your mind?
Friendship.
Yes.
Friendship. So what comes into your mind when I put out those titles like that? What do you, anything you want to say in this kind of context outside of a written
about
word,
those
about any of the
essays? I think the essays you mentioned are among his greatest. The essay on friendship, I think, is a radical essay, and it has affected others. It seems to have almost no precedence for its leading idea, which is that the friend should be a kind of beautiful enemy. I mean, that's the phrase that Emerson uses. That's the phrase around which the essay on friendship turns. I think Emerson really thought that friendship was a greater form of human connection than romantic love. He fell in love with a woman who I think died young. Is that right? And then married a woman whom he loved in his own way. But I really thought that with Emerson you have someone who thinks friendship is at least as great a human phenomenon as romantic love is.
Now, hold that thought. I'm sorry. Are you saying that that part of the essay was unique at that time in the 19th century?
I think so. Nothing is complete. I don't think can be completely original, but there may be others before Emerson who thought about friendship in this way, but I could not find them. It is clear that Nietzsche read Emerson's essay on friendship and reproduces the sentiment, if not the exact phraseology, in his writings on, or his occasional discourse on friendship. Nietzsche certainly is one of Emerson's perhaps greatest reader, finally. And the essay on friendship is something that Nietzsche made clear without saying so. That essay really mattered to Nietzsche. Concerning, you're right to pick on circles and compensation. They go together, and they're great essays. And one part of the greatness of compensation is that even the tendency of the opposite of something to emerge eventually or at the same time as the thing itself. He even goes so far as to say where there is something good, there will necessarily be something bad emerging in reaction or response to it, or at the same time and from the same root. It's not a secret teaching in Emerson, but it is there, and if not central, it is nevertheless importantly present, I think, in the essay on compensation. This is an essay, a very rich essay that deserves repeated reading. Circles is a wonderful essay. I try to suggest that he's really talking about spirals as much as he is talking about a circle that is flat on a piece of paper. That things are constantly spiraling in a circular motion, and that there is a dip sometimes before there is a flight. It's an amazing piece of work. Was there precedent for this? I can't say I could find any. No doubt he read Coleridge and respected him greatly. And of course he read the Greek tragedians and Homer, and he read Shakespeare devotedly, wrote some marvelous passages on Shakespeare. But I think that, I've tried to say it, Emerson is the American Shakespeare. He absolutely is. He says everything.
Well, would you say you given your generation and your experience in teaching and writing and thinking, the kind of education that you had, would you say that was totally unique? Because when I read your writing, you don't just write on Emerson, you write on Machiavelli, and you write on Augustine, and you write even on Foucault. So you keep up with later developments in thought. Do you owe your ability to write on such a broad variety of thinkers, Hobbes? In a moment, I want to get to Hannah Arendt. I'd like you to talk about her because she's really important.
Of course.
But
right.
Do you think that your facility in these thinkers owes to the particular education that you did have at that time, or because it was a canonical education, wasn't it, to a certain respect? Or
well, you're very kind to say these things. So let's assume that I agree. I agree with you at the cost of appearing self-important. But the fact remains that having gone to Columbia College as an undergraduate at the age from 17 to 21, graduated at the age of 21, that meant everything to me. Now, I went to a very good high school, Brooklyn Technical High School.
Oh, yeah.
It was
a good high school.
One of the special high schools in New York City. You may know about it or may have heard it mentioned. You said you were from Manhattan. Well, this was Brooklyn Technical High School.
That's right.
And that was a great school, but at times I felt sort of a bit imprisoned by the workload and the insistence on certain interests that I grew out of, or at least lost. Let me put it that way. I thought I wanted to become an engineer, but that sort of went away. But then going from Brooklyn Tech to Columbia College, remaining in New York City, was really having another life altogether. I would never disown what came before Columbia College in my life. Never disown it. But Columbia College really was something, and Mark Van Doren was just one, though an important one, of great teachers there. They included Jacques Barzun and Peter Gay and C. Wright Mills.
C. Wright
Frankel.
Wow. Well, C. Wright Mills and Peter Gay are, of course, big names. Back when I was a journalist, I interviewed Jacques Barzun back in the mid '80s.
You did?
I did, for a newspaper, and I was very impressed with his erudition and his the scope of his interests. He knew about music, and he knew about
Yes. Oh, he was really something, no doubt about it. And he was a very good undergraduate teacher for the simple reason that he undergraduate students took his course, which was intended for undergraduates. So he taught both groups simultaneously with the same words, and it was a really great experience. This tall, blonde man speaking in faultless English and never talking down to people, certainly not those in front of him, but you knew that you had to reach towards him. I accumulated many debts to my teachers at Columbia. There are others as well. The late Franz Neumann, who wrote a book called Behemoth on Nazism. Great, powerful teacher as a graduate that I knew as a graduate student. And many others. So if you say I write about a wide variety of people, thinkers, yes, that is true, but I would also say I'm not alone in this. There are others who do the same, and some of them are in political theory, and I think political theory as a subject invites the wish to know closely texts, if that's the kind of political theory you do, texts from the ancient Greeks all the way up to the 20th century and now beyond. And you have a sense that a book is a book, and a great book is a great book.
That's
and
right.
it invites reception and response. And if you come at it from a political perspective, you are not damaging the book. One hopes. Yes. Now, Sklar was someone who wrote about even more writers than I did, and
Yeah, that is true. I'm sorry, I wanted to tell the audience may not know Judith Sklar.
Judith Sklar.
Judith Sklar.
She died. Yes. Go ahead.
What would you want to say to a general audience who's not familiar with her, what her contribution to political philosophy?
Judith Sklar, Schklar, taught political theory at Harvard for many years. She died, however, unfortunately, at a comparatively early age, 67. She died in the 1990s. I wish I could remember the exact year, but I can't right now. And among her books are these. Her first book, After Utopia, which is really about the decline of political idealism and optimism. A wonderful book, but it ranges widely over the entire corpus of European literature. She also wrote a book about American citizenship. She wrote a book called The Faces of Injustice. Her most famous book is called Ordinary Vices, and she writes moral essays on such vices as hypocrisy or cruelty. Her motto for her entire life's work was derived from Montaigne's words on cruelty, and Sklar made it as her adage, put cruelty first, before all other considerations, which is to say, put the elimination of, or the end of cruelty above all other purposes in active political life. She was, if you will, a kind of negativist in her expectations, and I think that's one thing that I share with her, and I come at it, as it were, from my own experiences of life, including the education I received. So we had. This is not to say that I compare myself to her. It's only to say that we shared. Well, we were friends and very good friends, and her loss was a great loss to me personally. And we both shared a kind of negativism. This might have to do with something about the 1950s. I can't be sure of that, but it began early. Though my first book, as you know, was Utopia and Its Enemies, and it was a qualified defense of political of perfection.
Yeah, that's right. The book is that's your first text, right? Your first book am I right?
That's right.
And that book, I guess, was. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it is a very qualified defense, and I take up all the as many arguments against wanting utopia as I could devise. And I strip down what a utopia really is. So this sense, I think it has to do with the closeness to World War II and to the Holocaust and to other horrors done before the war, during the war, and still after the war with Stalin in power until he died in 1953. It's not the Cold War. It's not that. That's not the cause of the pessimism. The cause is World War II and what brought it on and how it was conducted by all sides, dropping the atom bomb twice. And I still hear Wright Mills saying, fine, drop the atom bomb once, but twice. And he lost control of his voice as he was saying this in the class.
Wow.
So, yes, okay, people formed in the 1950s often bear a load of pessimism, yes. And that is why the coming of the 60s was so shocking, surprising, and finally I thought marvelous. It was to slough off, if possible, the kind of hopelessness that could have been induced by growing up in the 1930s, 1940s. Then the 60s came along, and that's another story. And it had a great effect on me, I must tell you. I was teaching at Emerson, and I learned from my students. They were the best students I ever taught, these undergraduates, 1965, 6, 7, 8, 9, 71, 70, 71, 72, 73, and then, okay, no more, it's gone. But my God, it was great while it lasted.
Wow.
And we carried on anyway, yes.
That's fantastic. I know that I wanted you to talk a little bit about your personal politics, because on the one hand, you have your more philosophic writing, like, say, you're writing on Emerson, The Inner Ocean. Well, of course, in the Inner Ocean is this title is Individualism and Democratic Culture. So I wanted you to discuss your conception of individualism, which I think is connected to your personal politics, and quite possibly clear up misconceptions that I think have been brought to us by maybe communitarians or people that are anti-individualist. So speak a little bit about this issue of what identity is, or what inwardness is, and what a self is, and how people might mistake those concepts, and if you don't mind.
Right. Well, good. I think it is important when I think about these matters, to say that, again, it begins, the stimulation is given by something I oppose, something I find undesirable. There's a negativity I think at the root of my positivity. The negativity comes from the harms and injuries and atrocities inflicted by strong group identity. So I define individualism right away as having a built-in skepticism concerning the comforts and the temptations of group identity. Now, that's where I start in defending individualism, most abstractly speaking. I then, in the 1980s, early 1980s, late 70s, early 80s, thanks to the influence of Emerson, and then having read Emerson, reading Thoreau and Whitman, his two greatest pupils, if you will, I developed the sense that these three defenders of individualism, drop the word transcendentalism. We don't need any reference to something more than human here. Though the great democratic teachers of individualism, Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman, all were, if you will, anti-atheist. But they were not Christian, and they were not orthodox in any religion. They just thought that that life itself was sufficiently a puzzle, a mystery, as to require reference to something that supposedly would eliminate the mystery, and they called that God. And the trouble was that they replaced one mystery with another mystery, and they never got to their destination. In any case, they are teachers of the individual. Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman. They, despite some of Whitman's exaggerated love of the country, they really believe that there is nothing real in life but the individual, if only the individual would see that point. And they think that being an individual is a possibility. It's never a fate, it's a possibility open to any human being. And that democracy especially is built on that tenet, even though it doesn't always say that it is. So that in talking about individualism, I decided to have the phrase democratic individuality. I don't lay claim to coining it, but there, I've used it from the writings from the 1980s on, I think. Democratic individuality. And it is the kind of self-conception that democratic political and cultural institutions fosters. It is to say that I do not want to be seduced or tempted or taken over by any group ideology, any group mission or cause. I do not want to think that unless I can claim some affiliation or adherence to something larger than myself, I am nothing. I resist that claim. The individual resists that claim and tries to work out the self as a lifetime project, avoiding the seductions and temptations and habits of believing that membership in a group answers all the important questions of life, that an affiliation or an adherence to something larger than oneself absolves oneself of thinking through for oneself everything that truly matters existentially about, if I may use that word, about life. And this is not egotism, as I have tried to say, and even wrote an essay with that very title, Individualism and Egotism, or something like that.
Yeah, I referred to that essay earlier when a light went off in my head, and I saw these are actually antonyms. These are opposites. These are antonyms. They're the mistake that people that say they're against the individual make. They confuse it with egotism, yes. I guess. Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Thank you.
Yes. Individualism is not a doctrine of selfishness. It is a doctrine of the self and the importance of the self and the importance of having a self. But as I try to say, something then happens to the democratic individual, maybe from the start and maybe with time. And the two things that happen to join this sense of positive individuality is the sense that what I claim for myself, and this is where the democratic part comes in, I must claim for others and acknowledge in others, and if need be, help others achieve. And therefore, what is it that most harms individualism? Individuals, the individuality of individuals. It is oppression of one kind or another. And with time, I saw that also poverty must be taken into account as well as damaging the prospects of a person becoming an individual. So there is this, what I say, negative individuality, which I define as resistance on behalf of others, and I think Thoreau is the great exponent of negative individuality. But it has to be based first on taking oneself seriously as an individual. Then the last and greatest derivation from individuality, I think, is what I call impersonal individuality, and that's what especially distinguishes it from selfishness. And I try to define it as, with Emerson at his highest moments in mind.
Impersonal, that's interesting.
There's that passage on the transparent eyeball.
The transparent eyeball, that's right.
I become nothing. I am nothing. And what is around me is everything. And I try to apprehend everything, and that then produces the Emersonian method, if there is one. You look at a phenomenon, you don't run away from it. You give it attention. If need be, you breathe life into it. You forget yourself in the quality of attention you bestow on something not yourself. This concept of attention I've had impressed on me by the writings of Simone Weil. W-E-I-L. Simone Weil, 1940s in France, dying from starvation because she would not eat more than the rations of people in occupied France. Wrote many great books. She's a great thinker, but her leading concept is attention. You pay attention. I find this, and it may have intensified my attraction to Emerson, reading her at roughly the same time. This is what impersonal individuality is, the greatest of the three components of democratic individuality, greater than the positive, greater than the negative, philosophically speaking, and it is impersonal individuality. It is losing oneself in apprehension, in apprehending things, in understanding things, devoting oneself to trying not to dismiss, not to feel too much distaste, not to feel disgust too quickly. This is not all forgiving. I try to avoid that. I continue to talk about evil, and I mean it when I talk about it.
Yes, you're very.
There is such a thing.
You're very serious about that. I mean, Patriotism and Other Mistakes is the one volume, but I'm sure there are others where you take evil very seriously.
I do.
In Human Dignity, which is a book I want to recommend to all listeners. If you were to get one George Kateb book for the holidays, I would recommend Human Dignity.
Thank you.
Belknap, Harvard Press. You talk about evil in there too, because I think you're talking about threats to human dignity, and you get very detailed in what those threats are and what the causes are. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these moral issues or considerations a little bit? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I worry about assaults on human dignity, and I worry to the extent of thinking that the person's self-understanding can be so damaged by the injuries and wounds and harms done to the individual that he loses sight of himself as a person, as an individual person, and becomes a person instead without personhood. It becomes just incapable of doing anything but existing and doing anything to exist. And after a while, even giving up on that. I have in mind the writings of, Bruno Bettelheim, first of all, on human behavior in extreme circumstances. That's one of his earliest essays in English, and about the impact on people who were in concentration camps and eventually in death camps. And all the literature on concentration camps, whether it is Nazi or Stalinist or other concentration camps, in varying degrees of severity, and that would include even the relocation camps for the Japanese Americans.
That's right.
During the Second World War. The impact on that kind of treatment is meant to eliminate the personhood or the humanity of the individual and make him or her into, it would be insulting to say, into an animal. It would make the person less than an animal.
That's right.
It would. You read some of these descriptions, people stop caring about anything. It makes them blank, and this is a terrible thing to happen. This is the person's loss of sense of dignity, sense of being a human being, and with it a sense of humanity altogether. These are some of the damages and harms and wounds done prior to death in camps of various kinds, but especially those we associate with Hitler and Stalin. This is, again, awareness of Hitler and Stalin and what they did accounts, I think, also in part for, even if it's not said explicitly, for the negativity or the pessimism of writings of people who were beginning to write in the 1950s. It took a while, not long, but it took a while for the impact on young people of the horrors of the 1930s and 40s to seep into their self-understanding and give them a project in life, something to think about, something to make sense of, something also that leads one to hope that these things don't happen again. So, do and will, but that only comes with age. That sense of incurability comes only with age. But yes, the loss of the deliberate infliction of the loss of being human on people. This is it's not the invention of the 20th century. You read some of the sufferings of prisoners of war and so on in Thucydides,
Thucydides and actually other writers write that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I think I do remember right. There is something in Thucydides about the Athenian prisoners in a quarry. Is there not? Or am I being confused now? But I would have to go back and check. But in any case, the loss of humanity because of certain kinds of mistreatment. This is an important theme from the 1950s going forward, and
absolutely.
Well, also torture, the subject of torture, which is old as humanity. This is also part of this general sense of the worst that can be done to people. There's always torture, and many countries engage in it. And under George W. Bush, the U.S. engaged in it. But there is the further view, which I believe is the truth, though it's not said often enough. War itself is a dehumanizing evil on those who suffer from it. Every conceivable human evil is done to somebody whose town or city has been bombed, or who is subject to conditions of starvation brought on by war. Some of the literature about the American Civil War, the treatment of Union soldiers in Andersonville, for example, but that's not the only example. This is terrible self, and my interest in evil comes from the literature on what happens to people in extreme circumstances, whether it be a death camp or a concentration camp, and I would add, in time of war, when your country is being bombed, or soldiers are fighting on battlefields, and are wounded grievously. Yes, how could one not be concerned as a political theorist with the amount of evil that the world has shown and continues to show? Evil understood as, well, yes, terrible suffering joined to the cost in human dignity, the cost in the human self-conception, losing sight of being a human being because of the terrible things that one is going through. These are grim subjects, but they are the subjects, finally, of political theory. And to be a political theorist and not take up the worst, the suffering and the dehumanization, two different things. And they go together, but they're separate things. You can suffer without being dehumanized, but you can't be dehumanized without some kind of awful suffering, I think, or threat of suffering. But maybe you can. But I'm not sure about that. But they go together anyway as concepts, and human dignity is an effort to prevent those conditions where the sense of dignity for the human being and for the species as a whole is lost or weakened or made implausible. Yes, so evil has to be a subject. I know it sounds cold and even silly to say evil has to be a subject.
Yeah.
But if you're fortunate enough, not yet at least, to see the worst, you have to know that others have not been as lucky as you. And you have to take thought.
Yeah.
You have to take thought.
Well, that's really beautifully put. And so, in that line, I recommend people read Your Human Dignity, because in that one volume you get into great detail on these issues and the things you're discussing now.
Yes.
On a side note, I might say that it's interesting. Your book came out at the same time that a noted public intellectual, Steven Pinker, said that he thought the notion of human dignity was squiggly and useless, I think, or meaningless.
Yes,
I
know.
It's
I was aware of that as I was writing the book.
It's interesting.
Or if it came out after or too late, there were others who were saying the same thing, but I think, I'm almost certain something else Pinker had said stayed with me. And though I don't mention his name, I believe, I don't, words like his or his own helped me get enough anger to be able
to write the book
in defense of human dignity. Oh, he plays the value. He still is up to his old mischief.
Well, I wanted to ask you, how much do you think that ideas like his, and of course he is a very intelligent, has contributed a lot, but his contributions, wouldn't you say that they're more in the realm of natural science or related? How much of these issues have to do with the fact that sometimes natural science people and humanities people, that there's a gap there, or they often talk past each other and miss their projects are different? Is that what it is? I'm just trying to think out loud, but I'm wondering if you any thoughts on that? That it's almost like two different traditions. Right. Yeah.
But most scientists are not this way, whatever their science may be.
Okay.
As we know, many scientists have been politically radical and are often politically liberal. It is only certain kinds of science and never everyone practicing that kind of science that lead to a kind of feeling, well, humanity is only an animal. There are many animals. Some animals can do things human beings can never do. Birds fly from their own nature. Human beings can't do that. And it's one of the great wonders of the world that there are creatures that fly unaided by machines, and other animals have other capacities. Practically every animal species does have some special capacity. The realm of nature is full of creatures worthy of admiration. No doubt about it. But, as I try to suggest, they don't admire themselves. It's only humanity that has the faculty of admiration. It's only human beings that have the faculty of wonder. Human beings love cats and dogs, but cats and dogs don't love each other, and cats and dogs don't love, generally speaking, horses, and horses don't love rabbits, and rabbits don't like, they certainly don't like kangaroos, or they certainly don't like animals that prey on them, and so on and so forth. There are, human dignity is part a matter of human distinctiveness.
I think I may have missed,
unlike anything else in nature. And I choose to emphasize the faculty of comprehension of what is not human.
Well, I wanted to clarify something, because I think I didn't make myself clear enough when I talked about science and the humanities. I don't want to be misunderstood. Of course, scientists can be as well versed in the humanities as humanities people, and be sensitive. I didn't. That's not what I meant. What I meant is that certain ideas, I guess, of reductionism, if that's the right way to formulate it, that certain scientists tend to not take seriously. Take seriously certain kinds of learning that are outside the physical sciences, can lead them to dismiss ideas and dismiss things as unreal. That's all I meant. That's kind of what I was thinking that tendency comes from. But maybe you think there's another reason for it. I don't know. But if you have any thoughts on that.
I think that there are two things. Some scientists are what used to be called naive materialists. Still, there are some. And the other thing is, it's not only scientists who can be naive materialists. There are some philosophers who would fit in that category, and who, though they're not scientists themselves, think that the only reality is scientific. I associate that thought with logical positivism,
right?
Philosophical tendency, 1940s and 50s, and there's still traces of it. The only real knowledge is scientific knowledge, and all the rest is speculation and mystification. Yes. Now, I do know some scientists, and they're not naive materialists. I don't know that they give much thought to these matters. Sometimes they do, but the thing is, the point would be, I think, there is something about humanity that is different from everything else that we have any awareness of in the whole universe, and that this does not lead to an affirmation of any theology. It just so happens that it has happened that a species of animals, Homo sapiens, has developed with the capacity for language, and hence self-consciousness, and hence also the capacity to develop what I call notational systems, involving numbers and letters, and involving musical notes and all the rest of it. I mean, this is not materialistically reducible, it seems to me.
Right.
Language is not a material phenomenon, except in the trivial sense that when we talk, there are sound waves, but these then become impossibly difficult subjects. All I can do is say certain things are clearly not the case. Humanity can do things that other creatures cannot do, no matter how gifted they may be in what they do. And these things are not materialistically reducible.
Right.
That's all. You see, I'm sputtering, and all I can do is sputter. Finally.
Well, no, I wanted to mention a couple of people. Now, you've spoken on and written about Hannah Arendt.
Yes.
What for an audience not as familiar, what was the importance of Hannah Arendt's view of philosophy and politics and statecraft? What do you things that you take from her or learn from her as a thinker that are important?
Well, I think again, she was one of those German Jewish emigres from Hitler. She left Germany, but she didn't go directly to the United States. She lived in France, first Paris, then the south of France, unoccupied France, and then left for New York. She was one of those emigre scholars: Hannah Arendt, Leo Strauss, Herbert Marcuse, Theodore Adorno for a while. All these are still highly reputable thinkers in not only in political theory, but mostly in political theory. Even though they were all philosophy students as undergraduates, there was no political theory for them to study. They were all philosophers, trained as philosophers, different kinds of philosophy, of course. And Hannah Arendt was one of them. I thought for a long time that she was, and I still think, she was probably the most creative and original of them. Though I would never anymore disparage Leo Strauss as I as I did because I picked up a prejudice from some of my Columbia professors against him without having read him.
Yeah.
Then I read I think I've read practically every book that he wrote and published while alive, and even one of his posthumously published books, a great book on Plato's Symposium.
Actually, as it happens, I actually read that newer book. That's a good book.
My appreciation of it.
I don't know Strauss as well as you do, so I think you've read all. I've only read, but that's one of the things I did read. But but as far as a book on Plato, that's a fantastic book on Plato. I mean,
there you go. I'm glad.
Yeah, but
you're the only other person I know who's read it. I think it's marvelous. And Marcuse, about whom I did write a long essay many years ago. Some of it was critical, but I would not have expended the energy in writing this essay on him had I not respected him, and I still respect him. So
that's interesting, because I think you reject his Marxism or his.
I've never been tempted by Marx. Never.
But your own political philosophy is very unique in America. Because people try to pigeonhole you and they can't, because I think because your thinking is so independent. And
you're very generous. They do call me a liberal, and I'm perfectly willing to accept that as a description. Okay. Okay. But no one has ever called. Well, yes, more often I've been called conservative, but with a small C, and maybe I am.
See, that's what I mean. It's hard to you sometimes liberal, sometimes conservative, depending on who's doing the appraisal, who's evaluating you. But yeah, that's an example.
And in some respects, I think I'm radical. Well, maybe not. Maybe I'm just. There's an old term that Arnold Kaufman, late of philosophy at Michigan, coined. It's called radical liberalism. He wrote a book with that title. I guess I feel close to that. But yes, I think it is important for me to say to myself, I've never even been tempted by Marxism, and that because, in some respects, he encourages naive materialism in others, even though he himself, I suspect, knew better. He was polemically a naive materialist, so thinking just becomes a reflexive outpouring from one's conditions of life. He knew better than that. There was one Karl Marx, and he knew that as a fact. He was a genius, and he knew that as a fact. Mm-hmm. He said things that hadn't been said before, and he knew that too. He was a genius. But I've never been tempted by Marxism. I've never been tempted by adopting any ism named after a person, and
right.
I just haven't. Though again, teaching political theory, you do have to teach mostly books you don't agree with, and you learn something from them. That is how I try to teach.
That's really interesting to me.
Teach political theory. These are great. They're worthy of your attention. You don't have to agree with any one of them, and you may find few sentences that you don't agree with. In Plato, for example, or Aristotle, or Hobbes, or Rousseau, but golly, there's something going on there that
may I ask
you up.
May I ask you a question about your capacity to do that? So let's say you have a seminar or a small classroom or a large classroom. How are you able to transmit the ability to love and admire and respect a thinker without having to actually follow, believe, or think pro or con, thumbs up? Or how do you transmit that capacity to your students to do that? Is it let's talk about that's a very interesting capacity.
Well, I find your question interesting and it's not easily answered. My practice sometimes was to isolate a paragraph or even a sentence and say to the classroom, just look at this sentence. This is a remarkable sentence. You might not believe in other things that the writer is saying, and Hobbes is a very good example of this.
I actually love Hobbes. I think Hobbes is really underrated, and I think people kind of take to Hobbes. But anyhow, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yes, and so if I were to ask you why you think so well of Hobbes, wouldn't your answer refer to particular thoughts, or to a more general power of articulation or formulation that you find in him?
Well,
that is how I proceeded. Notice this man's ability to formulate and to create arguments and to have perceptions that are true, particular perceptions that are true, even though the final result need not be acceptable to us. Yes.
Well, I would say in the case of Hobbes, it's the fact that he takes the human need for harmony and peace seriously.
He does.
And
human need. Yeah.
It's a human need, but actually a lot of thinkers don't even take those things seriously. Other thinkers tend to dismiss those things as survival thinking or as too primitive or basic or something. But he says, look, people have to live together, and there's always this potential danger, I guess, that brigands or that predators will get the upper hand. So I think he's concerned.
He really feared the insolence of the privileged, and thought that they were always up to mischief because they thought so well of themselves, and disturbed the peace of the great majority who would be willing to live in peace, provided they weren't contaminated by ideas inspiring revolt in them. He's a great thinker. He knows how to write. He's something, no doubt about it. And he's not entirely wrong. That much I have to give him. He's right about some things. Yeah, you can't teach a whole book, a book wholly made up of errors. There's no great political theorist who's only produced errors. There's always insight, no matter how much you disagree with them in their final recommendations or conclusions. You teach. I taught those books that I thought had the power to wake people up a bit. And I think the great ones have that. Plato and Aristotle and Machiavelli and Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau and Mill and Nietzsche and beyond. Yes, they wake you up.
Speaking of waking up, may I ask you a technical question about Isaiah Berlin?
Sure. Yes.
Is Isaiah Berlin's argument or essay on the originality of Machiavelli, is Berlin right about that or not? I mean, in terms of Machiavelli, there's a before Machiavelli and after. In terms of, or do you think it's overstated? Right. I don't know.
I think you have the exact word. It's overstated. Something is going on in Machiavelli that had not gone on before. He's not only describing the machinations of people who want to get power or keep it if they already have it. He is doing so in a tone of voice that is new to the world. The tone of voice is not to pass judgment about the phenomena he's describing. He's taking it as a matter of course. He's taking wrongdoing as a matter of course. That's what's Machiavellian. Not really to pass judgment. Rarely to pass judgment except on incompetence and inefficiency. And I think that is new to the world. He never tut-tuts, as they used to say. He just says, well, he wanted this, and this is what he did to get it, and he got it. Or This other person wanted this, failed badly at getting it because he simply didn't know how to get it. And on in this way, because his books are about getting and keeping power in the sense of position, control, domination, how to get and keep these things, and his book is meant to improve. If you read him, it's meant to improve the practice of domination, or retention of power, even on the part of the majority of people against the few, not just the few against the many, or one against all. It's the tone of voice that has earned Machiavelli his bad reputation.
Yeah.
But he is a great thinker, and he's also, in his own way, a kind of romantic thinker. He really thinks that politics is this wonderful human activity, bad motives and all. He admires greatness. That's the romance of Machiavelli. He admires great empires and great durations of tenure in office, and he admires countries that conquer other countries. No doubt about that. Is Berlin right to say that he created another morality? I think that's a bad way of putting it.
Yeah.
It's not that he created another morality. He acknowledged that morality was what everybody said it was. It's behaving yourself. It's doing to others what you want them done to you, or treating others as well if they've treated you well. He was not creating a new morality. He was creating an attitude that said there's something more important in life than morality. That's the shock of it.
Yeah.
And that's success, political success.
Well, if success is its own virtue, then I guess Machiavelli is most unoriginal, because actually it's just a throwback to the ancient, right, to sort of ancient ideas. So in that sense, it's completely unoriginal, right?
Yes. Yes, I think you could say that attitude of impartiality or refusal to be shocked is present in Thucydides anyway.
Yeah.
And in some others, but practically every great writer is a moralizer. And Machiavelli tried not to be. Hobbes is a moralizer. He thinks life is to be lived, and you're stupid if you waste it on some ideology. And all the others, they're moral. Their passion is moral.
Yes.
Locke does not want tyranny to exist. One man rule to exist. He doesn't believe in it. It oppresses people. Rousseau wanted the equal status of human beings to be acknowledged by human beings,
That's right.
especially their rulers to begin with, and on and on and on. They all have a moral, political theorists generally have a great moral ambition. The interesting thing about Machiavelli is he has a non-moral ambition, which is to make political success more likely, no matter what it is that you're going after,
Right.
no matter who you are and what you're doing, and at whatever moral cost.
Yeah.
There is something going on there. Not even Thucydides is as cold as Machiavelli is, I think.
Yeah.
The thing is, he also, in writing as he writes, he equips people to resist him, resist those rulers who use Machiavelli. It permits readers of Machiavelli who are not rulers to anticipate the movements or interpret the movements of those who are
So you're saying
using them.
So you're saying that somebody who, like you and I, who's anti-war and believes in nonviolence,
Yes.
could turn to Machiavelli to how to fight warmongers and how to, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud on the...
You might learn some techniques.
Yeah.
from Machiavelli, or you might learn how to decipher what is being said to you.
Right.
He encourages suspicion concerning all political rhetoric. He always is saying, look, they're saying this, but what they really mean is that. And Machiavelli helps you to decipher. And that is undeniably part of what he is up to. He gives weapons not only to those who do wrong, but also those who might suffer from it. That's why he's a complicated thinker, and that is why he belongs in this list of the very greatest political theorists.
Absolutely.
Leo Strauss called him a teacher of evil. Yes, but not. He's not only that, and he's not the only one who does that. Anyway, he's also arming those who resist evil.
That's interesting. I wanted to ask you, because we're in very dramatic present times, right? If you look politically in the situation in the United States and the world,
yes.
You have such learning and thinking about politics and philosophy. Did you want to speak about the sense that you make of where we are now, or what? I mean, that's a very
that is up to you. I think I share the general view. At least it's the general view of people around me, and the center is Trump, and Trump is not like anybody else who's ever been president, and in certain respects, the one oddity is that he doesn't seem to believe in making war. And on the other hand, he's always lying, and he's always distorting the truth, and he's always making false claims, and he's bearing false witness. And he has also lent himself to the purposes of the far right in economic matters like the tax bill. And he's also made possible Republican successes that would not have existed without him. I think the Republicans knew he was the only Republican that had a chance of beating the Democrat in 2016. Very useful, and yet he uses those who find him useful. I don't know who's going to get the better part of that, but we all sustain some kind of injury by his presidency because he is such a liar.
Well, I know you yourself were an admirer of Obama, correct? I think you wrote a little on Obama. But do you
I certainly voted for him twice, and was shocked when he won. Didn't think he had a chance, and thought this was a good president. Really, very good president.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think that his learning and education was one of the things that made him the president he was? Because he was a very well read, learned man, isn't he? Is he not? I mean, I don't know if his background.
He is a thoroughly educated man. And it's not just a matter of degrees. Whereas you have a sense that Trump, no matter how much schooling he has, would have made, no matter how much it was, would have made no difference. He seems to have no inner life. Trump is just self-absorption. No inner life, no inner cultivation. He's very clever, Trump is, about the motives of others, and he has no self-understanding, so far as I can tell. I don't know how he'd explain himself if he had to. Truthfully, I think he'd be incapable of doing it. Yes, I thought Obama was a good president, especially coming after George W. Bush, whom I really didn't like either for the unnecessary war he perpetrated in Iraq, and with all the terrible consequences coming from it. And he was also very conservative, George W. Bush. But Trump is a special case. And he might be reelected. That's that's the scary part. But we'll see.
Well, I mean, I think there's something special about someone that takes as their field or career political philosophy. When that person that does that looks at the world and surveys current events, I think you can't not bring to bear the fact that you've read Thucydides and Machiavelli and Marx and your experiences when you look at the survey the landscape. And so that's the only reason I ask about topical current events, because how can I not? That's partly,
of course.
Yeah, how can I not? Although I may not want to dwell there if it's too depressing or we despair too much. Is there anything else? This has been really a treat hearing you speak in your own words on your work. Is there anything on these subjects of individuality, dignity, or anything teaching the canon or the great books, or anything on any of those topics that comes to mind that you want to share?
I think I've said I've said enough. I think I've covered. Thanks to your questions, I've covered what I thought should be covered.
Well, thank you, Professor Kateb. I hate saying goodbye, but all good things must come to an end.
Okay.
And
you're very generous to me. I appreciate this occasion. I really enjoyed your questions and your kindness. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.